Go for it.
And I will just tweet out this link while YouTube gets it up. Excellent connection. That's promising.
I'll retweet. I'll retweet.
We are live.
It says live stream offline for me.
It's probably coming online now.
Yeah. Let me just mute that. Okay.
And there it shows up for me.
Yep. Same
Perfect.
here.
I'm the only one who needs to see this stream. That's exactly the idea.
Right.
Let's
okay.
Do some camera movements for professional cred. There we go. All right.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So people will start rolling in. I think we can absolutely get started because they will keep rolling in and out. That's how live streaming works.
Yeah.
So welcome, Gerhard. You've been do you want to introduce yourself or should I improvise one?
Go on. I'm very curious how you would introduce myself.
Yeah. So Gerhard is the guy who showed up one day. I was doing some development work on changelog.com, and one day this guy named Gerhard started asking me questions about how I wanted the development environment to work, and I'm like, I just need it to work, man. Let's just say Gerhard at the changelog does not use Docker a lot, or didn't at least, and I needed to use the Docker, so I had some questions, and then Gerhard showed up, but because apparently that was his realm. And since then, he's been on the backstage feed of changelog a few times, maybe even the front stage one, talking about the state of the log and how they do operations and how they moved changelog over to Kubernetes and stuff. And I'm actually going to show up on, and I'm spoiling one of the releases of Shipment here. I'm going to show up on the new podcast they have on changelog, Shipment, which is run by Gerhard here. And I'm going to claim that you don't need Kubernetes for all the things. And I think it's only fair that Gerhard gets a chance to sort of show me why I should be using Kubernetes, or at least K3s, which is 5 less than Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the general idea.
That was a very good intro. Thank you, Lars. So we'll start with the important stuff first. The most important, it's Gerhard. So let's get that out of the way. Good. Excellent. We got that out. No, it's okay. Secondly, Docker. I have been using Docker for many years, 8 years, I think. Episode 6 of Ship It just came out, where we talk about Ian Meal. We talk about the history of Docker and how we use that, and how that got us together. I think it was 2016, 2017. Changelog.com, I have been, part of changelog.com for 5 years now, 6 years now, always on the ops side and improving things every year. So we blog about that. We even have podcasts about that. And we explain how year on year we improve things, what is improving and why it is improving. So we were using Docker at some point, we were using Docker Swarm at another point, and eventually went to Kubernetes, specifically Linode Kubernetes engine. So LKE, it's just a Kubernetes distribution. So part of this, this year we started the Ship It podcast, the Ship It show, and that's on changelog.com. And one of the episodes that we recorded with you, Lars, is Why Kubernetes. It's a working title, it can change. That is coming out next week. So as we had that conversation, we realized that we disagree on a couple of things, and that's great, but maybe we don't appreciate the other perspective fully. And we thought, why don't we make a live stream of that thing? And that's why we're here. So I'm going to show you, Lars, what does it mean to run this app, the Noted app, which is a Phoenix app on Kubernetes. And we start from a simple Linux host, a plain Linux host, and we go all the way. How does that sound?
Sounds pretty good. And sort of for context, I actually tried setting this kind of thing up with K3s. I had some help getting started, but we did not put nearly this much prep into it. Gerhard is a is a prepper when it comes to these things. He sets things up. It's so much YAML. You'll see. It's gonna be great.
It is, but that's an implementation detail. So that's a good point. So yes, there is YAML. There's also like a lot of Makefile, but it's something that just gets out of the way. So the focus, and this is like as people are watching this, I would like you to think how things are composing and how the system is a self-sustaining system. I think that's the most important takeaway. So we're setting something up that literally is meant to get out of your way, and it's meant to take care of updating itself, migrating itself. I don't want to, again, spoil too much, but it's a self-contained system. That's the key takeaway. And everything starts, in my case, you have to seed it and start somewhere, and this is our starting point. So this is a PR to public repo, to the noted repo. Anybody can check this out. How to add a self-contained K3s setup for this app. It has everything. So have a fork. The work is done here, so there may be a few changes, but as all good things, and I just did the PR. And we're starting on Linode. We spun up a Debian 10 VM.
Yeah. And they're not sponsoring this episode, no, but they really should be. Like, feel free to reach out, Linode. No, but I actually typically use Linode when I'm setting things up currently, unless I have real good reason to sort of narrow it down to Sweden or whatever, then I go with other hosts. But I rather like Linode. It's a good one.
I chose whatever was the easiest for me, and Linode was the easiest thing for me. All you need really is a Linux VM. That's it. It can be anywhere, anything, bare metal machine. Debian 10 is what I use. I prefer it because it's slightly faster and it's more lightweight than Ubuntu 20.04. But if you have Ubuntu 20.04, this will work equally well. I tested everything, so you'll be fine. My expectation was that Lars will be following along as I do this, but maybe he would prefer to focus on what's going to happen rather than
I'll mostly be paying attention, and then ideally I will be setting something like this up for myself later on, because I think there's a few adjustments that I'm bound to be making to run it on.
Definitely. It is a starting point. Yeah. I mean, that's what I want. Like, this is like the first step towards a self-updating system, and it's like all self-contained. And let's see how it works. How about that?
I'm super curious.
Okay, so
and for the chat, feel free to ask questions, and I can bring them forward to Gerhard. And I might even be able to answer a few. We'll see.
Sounds good. So the origin in my case, this is the Git repo, Gerhard noted. It's the fork of your repo, and I'm on this branch, k3s. And something that's new in this branch, it's a k3s directory. So let's go right in there. And this is it. These are all the files that we've added. The most important one is the Makefile. I like Makefiles. The reason why I like Makefiles is because you can declare dependencies very easily, and you can get a lot done with very little. It's slightly better than scripting because you can declare dependencies between targets, for example. By the way, Make is a build system. It's really old, decades old, 30, 40 years old, something like that. And it stood the test of time, I have to say. And it's really nice and simple in some areas. And if you use something like Basel or maybe something else or another build system, you know that things can get complicated. I think in the Elixir and Erlang community, Rebar 3 is a popular build system.
Yeah, so that's the Erlang typical one. Yeah,
I know that Mix is also used quite a bit, and Erlang MK, that's like another one. So there's like a few things, but Erlang MK is also like Make, right? But for Erlang. So,
but this is actually an interesting thing. So I haven't really gotten deep on Makefiles. I don't love reading them, especially when other people wrote them. So I typically end up with bash scripts, but I get it. From reading Makefiles, it's like, okay, this makes sense for building a structure where, okay, I need this value, and how do I get that value? I pull it in this way, and how do I get that? Well, this way. So it sort of makes sense. I really should get into Makefiles more. But with any tool like this that you use, I find that I keep needing to remember sort of what flags should I pass to this particular Docker build or Docker run. and I encapsulate that in a script because I don't want to remember it. So you always end up wrapping things in scripts at some point. And a Makefile is one of those methods, I think.
I used to do scripts a lot, and for many years, like for the better part of the last decade, I used to be big on scripting. And then I discovered Make. So when I discovered Make, I realized that it simplifies certain things, and it's all self-contained, and you can declare relationships very easily, as we will see, and that makes them really powerful. So for example, in my case, M is alias to Make, right? So I'm on a Mac, but it doesn't really matter. So if I run Make, the default target, it tells me what to do. Okay, there's like some line wrapping here. But this is meant to be run on a remote Linux host, right? So this Makefile is meant to run on a remote Linux host. To do that, we have this host, right? So how do we get the Makefile to that host? Well, guess what? The Makefile has a target, which is seed, that has some defaults. If I run make seed, there's a flag -n, which is dry run. It will tell me what it runs, but it won't run it. And it will show me the commands that it runs. And at the end of the day, it's just commands, right? So it's stuff that you'd maybe put into scripts. But it does also some templating. Like, for example, it knows what the default remote Linux host is. And this is something that I imagine you would like to modify.
Yeah.
It SSHs into that host. And if make is not installed, it's just literally a bash script. Then apt-get update, apt-get install make, and configure the host name. Because by default in Linode, when you provision a new VM, it doesn't have the host name set up correctly. So that's something that I always do is the first thing. Then it copies everything from within this directory, all the files, onto that host. And then on that host, it runs make env, which is the target. So it starts preparing the host. So let's run that and see what happens. Make seed, SSHs, command not found. So these things are running on the remote host. And this is one of the 2 commands that will run locally. Everything else happens on your Linux host. So as long as you have make and SSH and SCP locally, that's all you need. Obviously, and access to a remote host. So
yeah, this
that's
kind
all
of
there is to it.
seeding or bootstrapping or whatever you want to call it, like you always need to start the server somehow and get it to where it's got to be for the rest of the work to work.
Yeah,
I've definitely considered setting that up with so Elixir has a lot of SSH capabilities just from Erlang, and there's an SSH kit that I really would like to set something like this up with. But yeah, Makefiles much more portable.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it makes sense. That approach that you described makes sense. But what you need to remember is that this is the first step.
Yeah.
And once you take it, the system will be self-sustaining, and that is really powerful. Because the things that I do now is to bootstrap, if you wish, the first system, and the system that we'll have up and running, by the way, can bootstrap other systems. So it's literally your seed. So the really powerful thing is that once you get it up and running, you use the thing that you got up and running to get up and running other things, because then you want to maybe manage multiple VMs. Maybe you want to manage other infrastructure. Maybe you want to manage other Kubernetes clusters.
Wouldn't dream of it.
Whatever you want. You say that, but actually it's a
yeah.
Maybe we take that step another day, but it's not that complicated, and you'll see what I mean. So
I get it.
So there you go. So our host is seeded. So we could SSH into it, but again, I have another target. All it does is this, make SSH. So it's a clean Debian host, and now I'm on it. Okay. So what do you do, Lars? Or what would you expect to do?
Right now, I would just go ls and see what we got. But bunch of YAML.
There's just some YAML and another make file. So
yeah.
I think running make is a good thing. So that's all you have to do. So let me just make that a bit clearer. These are your training wheels for getting started with Kubernetes. That's what this is. Remember, training wheels, the first step. Okay? It was tested. You can watch the YouTube live stream, which is what we're doing right now. It's very meta, I have to say. And if this is your first time running this, remember to run source env. you run source env. Well, what is in env? So let's have a look at that file. We have an alias so that we can keep typing make. We have some auto completion for make. It stops right here. We have more aliases, and we have kubeconfig. But when we see the host, these things already have happened for us. So if I do make and now tab, I have make auto completion, so I can see what the targets are. Okay.
Getting fancy.
So, right. So finally, I mean, we don't need to do this. We kind of did bits of this. Here's a list of merit you can run. So make k3s. This is what, by the way, will start. Make k3s will set things up. Install a certified Kubernetes distribution in under 15 seconds. So how about we do that next? How long will it take to get Kubernetes? Again, make k3s. It's all contained in the make target. So you start at 12:50:56. Let's see how long it will take. Let's see if it will be 15 seconds. Again, this was a plain host. It had nothing on it, right? How much is that?
So
14 seconds.
Yeah. 14 seconds,
right? There you go, 14 seconds. Oh. So running this on a remote host is really good because you have a really fast internet connection.
Yeah.
You could be on a train. You could be on a plane, right?
Yeah.
If you work like this, I mean, I know this like reminds people, or it can make people think of mainframes, right? How we used to do things in the really olden times. And yes, it's a bit of like that, but it's different because the compute is so cheap and so abundant that you can spin it up, do your work, tear it down, and you're done. And if you want a bigger machine, you get a bigger machine. You want a GPU, you get a GPU. Whatever you need to get, and you only pay for the hours that you use it. It's a similar model, but slightly different. But anyways, moving on from that, we have k3s installed. So what would we run next, Lars? What would you like to see next?
So I'm mostly looking to be able to ship Docker containers to the thing and make it stand them up. And I'm guessing that's Argo CD.
Right. So yes, there is a bit of that.
But
like,
you
that's
want
actually the first target.
Something in between.
Mm-hmm. I think something in between. So You've just installed Kubernetes. What is the first thing that you do? You've just installed like k3s check, maybe.
I don't know. That's
k3s
why I have you
check. Here. Yeah, but k3s check. So there's a fail.
Okay.
This is a really interesting one. We won't go into it. It's a very interesting discuss. By the way, in the Makefile, all these things are documented. Everything is fine. It's not a problem. But it's interesting of the state of a certain software combination. So
yeah, that's interesting. IP tables should be older. That's
anyways, we won't go into that.
Yeah.
Everything is in the make file. So make check, k3s check. Everything's fine except that fail, which is it fails, but it doesn't fail and it's okay. So we can move on.
All right.
So how about we interact with Kubernetes via terminal UI?
Sure. I've seen you talk about K9, but since I don't actually have anything to point it at, I haven't tried it.
So there you go.
Yeah.
We not only started K9s, which is an Encrypted interface into Kubernetes, but it also pulled it down just in time. So just before we wanted to use it, it pulled it down, and we are targeting the Kubernetes node that we've just installed. It's just a single node. Yep. It basically runs here. Everything runs on this VM. So what do we see here? Well, the view that we currently have is the pods view, and we are in the all namespaces. So you can see that the pods that are running, the pods are basically multiple containers. So it's an abstraction above containers. So what you see, for example, in that this one has 2 out of 2, it means it has 2 containers. So you can have init containers, you can have teardown containers. It's a bit better to structure or think about containers in terms of pods rather than containers themselves, because you tend to have more than one and they all serve like different purposes.
And traffic is ingress, right?
Traffic is a proxy. Yes. It's okay. So so ingress is a Kubernetes concept, which is the equivalent of a entry in your Nginx, like a server entry. So if you're using Nginx or something like that, or like HA proxy, it would be an entry which would route traffic for a specific host, or a specific route to a certain backend. And traffic is the equivalent of the Nginx or the HA proxy, but it's a modern load balancer and a couple of other things. And by the way, this is what gets by default installed with K3s. So when you get K3s, it's a single binary. That's why it's so fast. It's a self-contained binary, and it contains the Kubernetes API. It contains, in this case, we can see that it used Helm internally to install traffic. So it doesn't ship traffic, but it knows how to install traffic within itself. And it's all just, when it boots up, it does these things. So what it means is that we serve HTTP and HTTPS out of the box.
Cool.
Okay, so we have this. I mean, there's an interesting view, which I always try to mention. By the way, it's the reason why I like K9s is because it embodies the Vim mantra, or the TIG, which is an N-curses interface for Git, which I use all the time. And a lot of the shortcuts are very similar. So you can see some of the shortcuts that you have here, and they're specific to pods, they're context specific. Let's make this slightly bigger so you can see everything.
I like that a control to kill. that just feels like one of those plastic lids on a firing button.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we can kill anything, and it's like, because it's a declarative system, Kubernetes in this case, you can kill anything and it will resume. And guess what else is exactly like that? Erlang. It's the same concept, right?
Yeah.
Kill things, they'll come back. So it's a very similar concept. So : and I can start typing commands. I do pulse. This is not a view. And what the pulse shows me, it shows me an overview of the entire cluster. So in this case, it shows me deployments, and I tab, replica sets, stateful sets. These are different Kubernetes concepts, pods, events, if there's any issues. And down here, memory and CPU. So how much we're using, how much is available, how much we're using. By the way, if you add more nodes and your cluster, your Kubernetes cluster is more than one node, this will update to reflect that. So you may have, 1,000 CPUs or 3 terabytes of memory, depending on how big your cluster is. And that's what's really nice. Like everything that you see here, it scales based on how big things are. So this is an interesting view. And if we go to node tab, we can see the node. In this case, K3s Gerhard IO, that's a name, it's a control plane, and it's also a master. By the way, this is discouraged to run it, because you typically, when you have a managed Kubernetes, the control plane is a managed service. So when you go to Linode or GCP and you say, hey, give me Kubernetes, you never see the master and you never see the control plane. What you see is the workers, the worker nodes. In our case, we have a single one, it's self-contained, but it's just for simplicity.
Yeah.
Cool.
And for some deployments, you don't actually need all of that.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe, yeah. But you can do that as well, so it's okay. Right, so what you typically do this point, and this is, I would say this is almost like a misconception. You would think that you start throwing YAML at Kubernetes, right? And you have all this YAML to go through, and it's just so hard and so confusing, and it's a misconception. You don't do that. What you do is you install systems that manage that YAML for you. You version control that YAML. You have maybe things that generate the YAML. And then these systems, which you add on top of Kubernetes, they consume the YAML and keep everything in sync. They keep in sync the state of the cluster with the YAML that you've declared. And the YAML is just basically your configuration. So you may say, you know what, I want a bunch of certificates, or I want a bunch of, I say load balancers, but you don't ask for load balancers. You basically ask for endpoints, right? Like public endpoints, so that you can start routing HTTP or HTTPS traffic, or even TCP traffic, depending on which layers you're operating at. So you're asking, or you're encoding what you want in this YAML. Sure, that's what we have. It's not great, but the alternatives aren't any better, by the way. And if you've been around for a while,
you don't have to defend YAML. I don't think anyone deserves that. It's quite all right.
Okay. That's not what I was doing, but I'm okay to skip this next part. So one such system is Argo CD. And Argo CD, it's a continuous delivery, continuous deployment system, which is meant to keep it's also like a GitOps, that's how they describe it, which basically you encode all this YAML and you put it in the repository, and then you point Argo CD to the repositories that you want to watch for changes and sync changes from and to, by the way. It's like bi-directional. So what it means is that if, for example, we want to deploy an app, we declare an app manifest in a repo. Argo CD is configured to watch the repo, and it's just automatically going to deploy the app and a bunch of other things. So that's what we're going to do now. But the first thing, we have to get Argo CD, right? Now, we're still in this world of Make, because if we had an Argo CD, we could use Argo CD to stamp out other Kubernetes clusters or other Argo CD, so it's basically can replicate itself. I think Flux CD, it is dangerous. It is dangerous, but it's also
take
super
over.
cool.
Yeah.
It could take over, yes. Yes.
Actually,
I think that's what you should be worried about.
One question. This setup, because it isn't managed by Linode, that this one wouldn't have sort of auto scaling at this point, right?
Auto scaling is
sort
not
of provisioning new nodes, let's say. Right now, it wouldn't have that capacity.
No, it wouldn't have that.
But if you have an LKE, that could be set up so it could just bring in new nodes when need is. Yeah, so I'm not sure where the feature on auto-scaling node groups is in LKE. Yeah. I'm not sure because I haven't followed that space. Typically what happens, you lay down your nodes, like 2, 3, 1, however many you need, and then you just like run workloads on top of them. And typically it's like 1, 2 apps, 3 apps. I mean, that's for like basically small teams like you and me and maybe most teams that we work with. If you have hundreds that use Kubernetes, then you don't have a single cluster, you have multiple clusters, and then you have auto-scaling, and it just gets a bit more complicated. But I think for small setups, I think auto-scaling, it may make sense to a certain point, but you can get very far with a single server, very, very far. I was mostly thinking around provisioning more hardware, not necessarily auto-scaling sort of app servers. But I know like managing, for example, volumes and storage is one of the sensitive parts that I've understood from k3s and k3s just reading on it. And that's one of the big reasons why everyone seems to recommend going with a managed solution for Kubernetes for tight integration into the cloud provider so that you don't screw up your volumes.
That's exactly right, yes. So if you do get a Kubernetes, for example, a managed one, then you have, as you mentioned, those integrations with, for example, the load balancing service or the block storage. I mean, Linode, I think these are the only two which it offers, but others, they have more, right? Like built in. You can integrations with other services. Yeah. But you could also encode this knowledge in a repo or like this in a repo that Argo CD keeps in sync. And if you have something like Crossplane, for example, Crossplane can provision infrastructure on your behalf, and it has a bunch of providers, AWS, GCP. So it would not be unreasonable to have an Argo CD system somewhere that keeps watching for like changes in the repo, and you say, hey, I want 100 VMs in GCP, and it spins 100 VMs. Or I want a bare metal instance with Equinix Metal, and it spins up a bare metal instance or networking or whatever you may want, S3 buckets, whatever. So you encode that knowledge, and then Argo CD makes it happen. So it manages infrastructure for you. But you're right, some of the integrations can be a bit more difficult. So people just go for managed Kubernetes. And the one really cool Kubernetes, which is managed, is GKE Autopilot, where you don't even have access to Kubernetes other than through the API. And it removes the concept of nodes. So you don't need to think about what nodes Kubernetes is running on, like what, for example, what worker nodes you have. You just ask for, I don't know, give me 10 CPUs, and it just tries to place it somewhere. Okay. So that's a really clever concept. But coming back to the present and what we have here.
Onwards to glory.
Onwards. So we interacted. So we did this. We did k3s. We did the check. I think we have this one. This basically restores. It just restores the node to the vanilla state. It cleans everything up, including itself. So we don't want to do that. Yeah. We could do clean n. Let's see how well it works. Dry run. These are all the things which it does. So it removes all the state. It removes everything in root, which are the Makefiles and everything that we seeded. It gets rid of the sourcing in bash rc. It uninstalls k3s. It removes k9s and nsubs. That's something there. But the point is, it just it restores itself to a clean state. Yep. So, but we won't be running that. The thing that we want to run now is, I think, Argo CD, because that's the thing which will put everything else together. So make Argo CD. This has a dependency on external DNS. External DNS is a component. And by the way, I realized that maybe I should make SSH again and make HINA so we see what's happening from that perspective. Pods. So we see all these things that are now starting to appear in our cluster. So we see external DNS. We see Argo CD. Namespaces, it's like logical groupings for pods and services and things.
Oh, it's got a Redis
all namespaces. It's got a Redis, yeah. So whatever it's pulling, Argo CD, whatever it needs is self-contained. And all I had to do is, again, just apply some YAML. Hey, Kubernetes, here's some YAML, take it. And I think in Argo CD's case, let me just go back up here. We have some local, there's like some configuration just to create the namespace and a bunch of things. But it's this where we're pulling YAML directly from Argo CD, so from GitHub. Specific version, install, and whatever that install has, that's what we add. And it just creates all these resources in Kubernetes. So it basically sets itself up. Okay. Now, some containers are still initializing 60 seconds later. So they will put a lot of pressure on the CPU memory. So things are rather interesting on this node, shall I say. But the most interesting thing is this one, the external DNS. There's a create container config error. We can see it's in status right here.
Yeah.
So what it means is that the container config, there's an error in it and we can't do something, right? Something doesn't quite work. Now, this is the problem when it comes to secrets. How do you get the secrets in from wherever you have them?
Yeah.
If you have them in a secret store externally, like, I know, KSM in AWS or LastPass or Vault or whatever. They're like different secret providers. Yeah. Or you can use like sealed secrets, which are like self-contained and stored in the repo, but that has like a couple of limitations. And anyways, the point is you need to tell this Kubernetes cluster, which is your Linode token. And the Linode token is needed, for example, to control DNS, to manage DNS on your behalf. So that's exactly what we're doing here. This is like the beauty of it, where you have components that, for example, they manage DNS or they manage certificates. And you just say, hey, I just wanted this new DNS entry, and it just makes it happen. Or I want to provision a certificate, and again, it just makes it happen. So in order to get a DNS entry in Linode, we need to add a Linode token. So maybe you haven't seen me do that here, but I start by running the following command, make seed, which we did. Remember that you'll need to run make seed secrets locally at some point. This is that point. We need to run seed secrets. So seed secrets runs locally. I'm not going to dry run it because you will see my secrets and I don't want you to see them. The idea is that
I think that's fair.
It's basically it runs the seed again, and then when it finishes, it will read secrets which are locally exposed in my env, the Linode API token, and it creates it in the k3s cluster. It goes the Telegram one, which is needed for the app, and it does the same thing, and the secret key base as well, so that doesn't exist. Now, this is something that should improve. It's not great, but it will do for now, and we can move on. Coming back here, we see that our external DNS is now running. So external DNS is
running. Picked up that the secrets are now available, or it just kept trying. I don't know if it picked up that there was a change, or if it just kept trying.
It just keeps trying. It tries to reconcile. You have like these reconciling loops, and it'll try and try again until it eventually succeeds. So we can see external DNS. If I do L for logs, K9s, I can see logs for all the containers in this pod. And it just shows you for every single pod what it does. So it's running It's okay. Critical CPU level, my CPU is really high. There are some things which are running, which for CPUs apparently are not enough. This is when everything boots, right? Everything boots, everything is, it just gets very busy. So that's what's happening right now. But I think things will, very soon, they will come down. It's like 91% CPU usage, but it will come down. Cool. So we have external DNS, we have Argo CD. So what did we get with Argo CD? Well, you mentioned ingresses, right? So we have, I think, first of all, let's look at DNS. So there's a DNS endpoint, and we have an Argo CD DNS endpoint. So this will get configured in Linode because the K3s Gerhard IO is managed in Linode. So what's going to happen is it will create a new DNS entry for me. So I click on, that's why I needed the Linode token. It says that the connection is not private. This is because the certificate is a self-signed one. So I'm talking to traffic. Traffic default cert is self-signed one. Again, this could be improved and it should be improved, but I just didn't have time. So we go advanced, skip, because I know it's the same one. And this is Argo CD, the interface. So let's log in. How do you log in? Well, you need the username and the password. I know that the default username is an admin. And
I think the username and password box is right behind our faces on the stream. So I'll just shift us around a little bit. Oh, there.
I can do that as well. There you go.
Okay. I'll put you back then.
Yeah.
Flush up there.
So username and password. So the password, the Kubernetes will have the password for this. There will be, so just as we have a DNS endpoints, for example, which stores DNS entries, so we have secrets. Now we are in all namespaces. So I think I'm going to limit myself just to the Argo CD namespace. So let's go to namespaces, Argo CD, enter, and let's go to secrets. So these are all the secrets in that namespace. The secret that we care about is the Argo CD initial admin secret. And again, k3s makes it super easy. X for decode, and you can see this is not a problem.
Yeah.
That's the secret.
Because that's been generated on install essentially. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this was one of the challenges I had getting Ooh, trouble.
I know.
But setting up k3s on my own, I did not have k9s. And just figuring out what component I needed to pull logs from, and the log messages were not great even when I found them. It was like some very vague errors trying to set up ingress at one point. K9 seems like a very good tool.
Yeah, it does. It does. It just it changes everything. It really does. So this password is not correct. This is something which I noticed last night when I was just finally messing with this and I was getting the last touches. The problem is that part of the booting Argo CD, somehow it gets out of sync. This password and the thing which it gets, they just don't match up. I don't know why it happens. There's a bug, obviously. And there's a solution to the FAQs in the docs, so it seems to be happening quite often. So what we're going to do here now is we're literally going to edit some YAML directly on Kubernetes. And we're going to apply it. So E for edit. And what we need to do is delete this admin password and password M time. By the way, this is in the docs. This is exactly what they recommend if you want to regenerate it. This is what you need to do. Again, this should be improved. I completely agree. Write the file. It will be applied. There you go. It was implied. So now we need to restart the component so that this gets regenerated. So we go to pods, and it's the server. So you wanted to kill it. We're going to do that now. It's we're going to go delete, Control D, not kill, delete.
Okay.
We can go for kill. There you go. Pending. Container creating. So it killed it. That's a hard kill, and now it's just being recreated. That's all it took. 2 seconds later, it's back. Exactly as you would expect from even an Erlang system, right? Kill a process, boom, it comes back up. And if it's a tree, the whole tree will be recreated. It's exactly the same concept. So this should have reseeded our secret. So if you go to secrets, secret here, decode, and we can see that we have a new password M time and a hash, a password hash. But the one that we're interested in is this one. So we can see this is different.
Hopefully
than what we had before.
This time.
And it does.
Ta-da!
Right? So Argo UI, not very interesting, right? You want to create a new application. So the application that we'll be creating is the noted one. And all the YAML for the noted, Argo will manage it for us. And it will synchronize from the GitHub repo and all that. So it's going to be really cool. So how do we do that? Well, make SSH. Let's go in there, and it's Argo CD noted. It just applies some YAML, and it will create an app.
But you created the original YAML for the Argo CD and the Argo CD noted things.
I created the YAML, so noted. I did, yes. So if I go back in here,
just so I know whether it was generated or handcrafted.
Argo CD. This is, it's based on this.
Yeah.
So if you click on this, this is like the whole, everything that you can declare, and there's like a link which explains it, like in the docs, which you get. So that's one way. You can also go through the UI, and you can define an app, so that would work as well. But I captured all the config in this YAML, which was based on the template.
Okay.
So yes, this is what I had to create, and also
that's a very short
CD,
YAML file, so it wasn't that.
That is a very short one. This is a bit more, so to speak. This is the YAML that Argo CD will know about, will keep in sync, which, for example, contains our app with a specific version, our variables, and everything. So this is something that, yes, I had to handcraft, but you don't have to do this often, and you typically copy paste. You really do. I mean, copy pasting is a very important skill for software developers and ops people everywhere. It's like, yeah, you just need to copy and paste. So anyways, we did that, and we can see the app configured here. So what is a noted app? Well, let's click on it. And this is what it looks like. We have an application. We have a service. We have an ingress route. This is for traffic. The ingress route will receive traffic. We'll send it to service. The service will not send it really to the deployment because there will be a bunch of pods, which we'll see once we deploy this. And we have the DNS endpoint. So we have a new DNS entry for this app. So how about we apply it?
Sounds interesting.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay, so let's synchronize. Synchronize, basically what it means is that it will take the application manifest from the repo, and it will keep it in sync with whatever's deployed. We can see that none of these exist. So synchronize, and as I do this, stuff starts happening. Argo CD now talks to Kubernetes, and it creates these things, and it can keep track of the state of the various things. We can see the DNS endpoint has been created, the ingress route has been created, the deployment is in the process of being created, and the deployment creates a replica set and creates the pod. That's where our app will be running. And you have the service, and this is like a very nice view. It explains basically how things are structured. But the top level is the app, and the manifest for this app is that little code that we've seen here. So this one right here, Argo CD noted. So this is what sees everything, and it tells which repo to go into, and which branch to use, where to find it in the repo, the manifest, and how to talk to Kubernetes. So it can be a local one or it can be a remote one, in which namespace the app should be deployed to. So that's it. Now back in K9s, if you look at pods, but we go to namespaces and we go to the default namespace, we have a new pod, the noted one. So this is our app. This is the noted app running. We can describe it to see what's in it. Not very interesting, other than, you know, the events at the bottom, successfully signed, pulled, it's running. L for logs.
And that's so more interesting. Or rather, that's very familiar. That looks familiar.
We can see some health checking going on. That's why we get these gets. It's just like, is it healthy? Okay. And if it's not healthy, it will be taken out of the service. But yeah, it's just the app is up and running, and we have this endpoint. So let's see if we click on it, what happens. That's our app. The DNS was created. It was integrated with Telegram. We have the bot set up, which we had to do before. So let's see what happens if I go through with this and I open up Telegram, and I will copy this. I'll paste in my Telegram, paste. By the way, copy pasting from what do you call it?
Across devices.
Cross devices, yeah. It's
Is
like
that...
an iCloud thingy.
You're using that one.
And there you go.
There's actually one for Linux too. KDE Connect can do that stuff. It's surprisingly good.
Excellent. Whatever works. If it works, the point is I was able to copy paste that.
Yeah.
And my first note. So show Lars how to k3s. Save. So it works.
Yeah, the app seems to work. You didn't get a portrait, but that might actually be a bug.
I didn't get a portrait. What is that?
You should have your face with your name up there.
Ah, yes, it is. When I refresh it, there it is.
All right.
Yeah,
might be a race condition actually.
Yeah, who knows? Let's see. We can look at the logs. I mean, if we have something there, the argument error.
Oh, that might be something when it's pulling that data initially. Actually, yeah, that's something to look at some point.
Yeah,
finding bugs.
For sure.
This is actually the first time this has been in production, so to speak. Like, I've run it plenty locally, but
yeah, cool. It really didn't take us very much. I don't think. I think it was, mostly just covering the basics and getting through these things. But we have DNS, we have obviously the app, we have Argo CD. I think that's the really cool thing, because now once we have this set up, what happens when there's an update? Should we try that to see if it picks up the details? Okay. So you mentioned that you've made some changes, right, in your repo. So if I git remote v git fetch upstream, let's see what changes you have. Okay, and now if I
so those are not visible changes though. They're probably not visible at all.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just config changes. What we could do...
Do you want to change something?
Yeah, just hop into the project if you can and go to the assets and CSS, app SCSS, and change the BG gray to 800.
Okay.
Should get a lot darker.
Okay. So we made this change. We need to get this in a container image. How do we do that? I think this is something where you want that part automated too. You just like to commit and push, and you want this to be taken over, right? So it should go straight into, it should go out live as soon as it makes it through the pipeline. So you should have a deployment pipeline for that. We don't, but I'm sure that we'll add one, right? I would love to see that. But in this make file, I have Docker running locally. I have make container image. It's an underscore because it's meant to run only locally. So it will build the container image locally. This will be the tag once it will finish building it. So with that in mind, how about we make that commit? We assume that this is going to work, and we assume that this version will have the change, right? If everything worked. So with that in mind, we go to k3s, we go to Argo CD noted, and we need to modify the version. So this version will be this one right here. The one that's just being built. By the way, it's pushing it right now. So very soon this will be on Docker Hub, and it's done.
No.
So that's the change that you want to commit. So we commit this, and we also commit the artifact that's already been built locally, but really pipeline should build it. Maybe GitHub Actions. I think there's a PR waiting that may do this. So we commit this and we say, change, I don't know, body background.
Yeah.
Commit and push. By the way, the thing that you've just seen locally, that's basically TIG. I use it all the time. So this TIG just allows me to do a bunch of things. I should
probably try it.
Yeah, I just spend a lot of time in the terminal, and just this really helps.
And credit to McBool, who interned with me and spent a bunch of time figuring out the Docker image, the Docker file.
Thank you. Yeah. That was very helpful, actually. Yeah, having that was really helpful. Yeah. So push it. I already pushed it, so I'll get back in my editor. I push this image. This is pushed on my branch, so I think the PR will update itself, and we can already see that it's out of sync.
Yeah.
So I think...
and it won't roll that forward on its own, or will it start?
It's not configured to do that, but it can.
Yeah.
It's not configured to do that. So in this case, sync, and we just want to roll out the change. Synchronize, syncing, noted. So it creates a new replica set and a new pod. So this is the new version that's just starting just to spin up. So let's see, I don't want to delete it. I want to click on it. So what do we see? Versions. This is not the best way of seeing it, but there. That's the version. Now it changes. Anyways, I think if we have, I think there was a diff view somewhere. Was it here? No, it wasn't here. There was a diff view that was able
in the
to
corner there. But
yeah, because there's no diff now.
Yeah.
Maybe if you go to the history, revision deployed at a few seconds ago. So I mean, we can click on the revision. We can see what changed there.
But so rather than tracking an image like noted latest, you rather have an explicit commit referencing like this is the version we want to put into production. And then you could also have different I guess different configurations or different setups that are like, yeah, this is what we should be putting to stage right now.
Exactly, yeah. Because you do want so you want all your, I mean, that's what GitOps basically is. You have your entire operational state in a repo that it captures the state of the world with auditing, with no access. No one had to have access to Kubernetes, by the way. And this is something that we don't even have for changelog, but it's the direction that we're going towards. So in changelog, we're using something Keel. It's called Keel SH. And that basically tracks latest. Whenever there's a change to the latest image, it updates whatever's running in Kubernetes. But that is not as good as this because you don't know what you're running, right? You're assuming you're running the latest one, but what does latest even mean? And what happens if you push another version and there's something wrong with it and we'll try and pull it and you apply it? Like, how is that going to work? So it's not a great way of knowing exactly what's running out there. Only that, assuming it's going to be the latest one, but what if I don't want latest? And it definitely doesn't show you this view, which is really cool. And you know exactly what you're running. You can roll back. There's like a bunch of things here. So
I'm betting that particular approach is not entirely uncontroversial because it does put sort of a gate between between something hitting CI and actually going into production, which some people are all about sort of no friction, continuous delivery, release as often as possible. And some people are very keen on knowing exactly what's going out. But I think those are different trade-offs for different orgs as well. I think, depending on your context.
I would combine them both. I really would combine them both. I would say there should be no gates. Everything should go out like straight through, automation end to end. If there's a problem, automatically roll back. Whatever. There's like so many ways you can do this. Argo
so really you would have the CI mark, like this is the version that should go out when it's finished checking it, and then the delivery would pick that up and shove it out.
So this commit, I would let the CI do this commit, and I would I would let Argo automatically pick it up and apply it straight away.
Interesting.
That's exactly what I would do. Yes. And if there's a problem, I would roll it back. So Argo has it has many features which are very useful for progressive rollouts. So you can declare in what ways and which ways things should roll out and what should happen. Like you can do like A/B testing. You can do traffic shifting. So you shift it from 10% on the new version. It gets very complicated.
But now we're going to find out if it can change a background color.
Exactly. So can it? I refreshed it.
Yeah.
That's darker.
Perfect. Ship it.
Yeah.
Or it's already been shipped. So
it's already been shipped. Yeah, exactly. So we still have a little bit of time left. If you want, what we could do is maybe talk next steps. I'm very keen on next steps. So with that in mind, I've left just that. There's a to-do. So if you were to merge this,
you bring a guest on your live stream and it gives you a to-do list. Fantastic.
Well, if you want, you don't have to. But if you were to merge this, these are the things that you need to change. Let's keep the first one. This is the to-do for me. That's just a grep. So the first one is obviously you'd need to change this to reference your image.
Yeah.
And I think there should be a better way of doing this. And maybe nsubs is it. I don't know. I didn't have time to think too much about that. Also, the domains, they shouldn't be hard-coded, but right now they are. The app shouldn't be hard-coded. So you have the host. Most of it is just basically my host being hard-coded everywhere.
Yeah.
So the bulk of it is that. Argo CD as well. The repo, obviously that has to update to yours when you're done. Yeah. If you want it, you don't need to want it. And the branch also, and the domain filter. This is if you do use Linode, for example, you may want to use something else. So by the way, Gerhard.io is managed on Cloudflare, but I'm delegating k3s to Linode. So you can do that. You can say a subdomain on my main domain, you delegate it to another DNS provider, and that's what I did here. So k3s is managed by Linode. So it's all self-contained. Cool. So now that we're done with this, I mean, you can do that or not. It's up to you. That's okay. We can continue the conversation.
Take a look. I feel like there's a few other things I should be unpacking, and one of them is that Makefile and just. So how much of that Makefile did you have already that you worked off of, or did you make it from scratch for this? Because I know it's a significant chunk of Makefile.
Yeah. So I think, yes, if you go back to the pull request, so let's go back to this one. If you look at the files changed to see what files have changed. So I think you'll see that most of this, the 532, it will be the Makefile. So that has 250. So half of it is this.
And half of the Makefile is probably emoji and pretty messages.
It is, yes.
Because you
it
put serious effort into making that friendly.
Yeah. That is very important to me because like there's nothing worse than getting something and you don't know what to do with it. Like, so what do I do next? How does this relate to me? So everything I'm trying to do is contextual. I'm trying to tease things out. You always kind of know what you need to do. You're never lost, and you just run make, and then you know, so what do I do next? Well, you can run this next. And the make targets, like on the host, for example, when you're on the host, make SSH, it just tells you what is possible, what you can run, so you're never lost, and that is important. You're right, a big chunk of that is this. So to answer your question about the Makefile, I've been doing this for many years. So I have, 100, 200 Makefiles in different projects that I use in different versions, in different stages. Changelog itself, so if you go in the changelog code base, the GitHub one, this is what I wanted. If we go to 2021, this is, by the way, it controls the entire infrastructure. It has a Makefile. So that was a starting point. I was using external DNS there. I mean, I'm setting it up a little bit differently, but there's a lot of stuff here that I used for the Makefile that I contributed. Manifest, for example, external DNS, how I configured certain things. So in the template, again, it's like a different configuration, and it's using DNS simple. But a lot of the stuff I already had figured out here how to do. So for example, I'm using an external DNS policy which uses upstart only, which means that it doesn't delete DNS records. When you add them and delete them, because of how DNS caches things and how many layers there are, it can take a while for the record to appear, so maybe 2-3 minutes. And for that reason, I don't delete them. So I would have to manually delete the DNS records. And that's something which I also added in this pull request. So it's upstart only if I search for that. Here, external DNS policy. So a lot of these things are just basing them and building on top of what I already have. And it's always like this continuous improvement, literally continuous improvement. For example, DNS. With this, I tried version 0.8.1. 0.8.0, and it works well. In changelog, you can see that we are using, if I go back, we're using 0.7.6. And we're using YTT to template things. We're not just the plain one. So there's a couple of differences there. We're not using Argo CD, which I want us to in the 2022 for the next year setup. So this basically gave me the opportunity to explore Argo CD a bit more, and I like what I've seen. There's a couple of gotchas. I had to navigate them, but it's good.
Yeah, so Argo CD doesn't seem like maybe the simplest solution necessarily, but very, very capable. I've definitely heard of it before, but I never poked at it.
The way I think about it is I would use Argo CD to manage the entire infrastructure. So in the 2021 infrastructure, I'm going to set up Argo CD, and that will be used to provision the new infrastructure. So literally one gives birth to another.
Yeah, so it has a repo that tells it how to set up the infrastructure, and
Yeah, exactly.
the infrastructure repo tells it, like, you also need to start this app over here, and that
Exactly.
one will be another repo, which, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So all these Makefiles, I mean, enjoy them while they're here because they'll disappear. Is what I'm saying. Like Argo CD will handle all of this.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
Cool.
and so typical things to add to this would be if I want, for example, cert manager for actual automated SSL.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there I
So
have a choice. Like, do I go with sort of site encrypt, which will do that in the application, or do I do that?
So for that, in changelog we use cert manager, and we do use let's encrypt.
Yeah.
This is how we configure it all. Now, cert manager, we provision certificates explicitly. You can have something like traffic, for example, provision certificates for you. But the reason why we provision certificates this way is because we reuse them in a couple of places. So for example, we reuse them in the CDN, and we reuse them. It used to be the load balancer, but we're no longer putting them in the load balancer. That's all handled by Nginx now. So yeah, that's not an issue anymore because we're using TCP load balancing for changelog.
Couldn't the
so we're not using
CDN
HTTP.
Couldn't the CDN provision their own?
That's such a good one. It could, but there's a limitation in Fastly in that you can either Fastly manages Let's Encrypt certificates for your domain, or you do it. But you can't have multiple certificate providers or provisioners if you're using Fastly, which is the CDN that changelog uses. So there's a limitation in Fastly.
Okay.
And if you go through this code base, if you go through the commits, you'll find the history where I mentioned that. So if you look at these, you will find like some of my commits. I mentioned I can't remember which one, why that limitation exists. So no, is like you can't, because then you can't provision certificates any other way.
Yeah, and I can imagine a few reasons why there might be some complexity around that. Like SSL has gotten a lot easier over the years, but it still has some edge cases. And
so let me show you something really cool.
Yeah.
I don't think you were banking on this, but you know what? Why not? So K9s, everything is familiar. So what happens when we do this? I go in CD 2021, I'm in changelog.com, I run make K9s, watch what happens. A bunch of things which just integrates basically with Linode. I have Linode CLI, and there I am. I'm targeting the cluster that runs all of changelog with all the components.
Yeah, and the setup with changelog right now is an LKE cluster managing one fairly beefy node, right? Like,
that's correct. Yes. That's a very good story behind that, but maybe we leave that for another time. There's a very good reason why we do this.
You have a podcast about
cluster.
You have a decent chunk of podcast where you talk about that, so that's all good. Okay.
So that's it.
These
are all
cool.
the changelog.com pods, everything. And you can see even the Grafana cloud integration. We are using Ingress Nginx. In our case, we're using Traffic for the noted one and for the k3s. We have CSI Linode. This controls the storage. We have Calico, which is the CNI provider.
So it doesn't investigate murders.
No, it doesn't. It's not that CSI. This is a different CSI. Okay. It's a container storage interface. It's you have CNI and CSI, which are the specs in which you can provide specific implementations for storage in Kubernetes. So imagine that you have a specific storage provider. The CSI would be the interface which you would need to implement so that Kubernetes would know how to provision storage, like volumes, how to mount them, how to unmount them, stuff like that. Okay, and CNI is for networking.
Yeah. So another sort of question about how to tie this whole chain together. What's your preferred way of doing CI for something like this? Like, is it a GitHub action and just keeping it at that level, or do you have a CI tool you like more? Is there something you
So-
can recommend?
What I would recommend is GitHub Actions, because you get a lot for free, and it's improved a lot. You have like a nice pipeline view. We use Circle CI. Oh, actually, we are using Circle CI right now. So if I go to Circle CI,
GitHub Actions did not exist when you set up CI for
exactly
changelog the first time. And
that's
Circle
exactly
CI
right.
is perfectly fine in my experience.
That works as well. But we would like to move away from Circle CI and go back to GitHub Actions so that everything is self-contained.
Yeah.
So this is our integration. This is what
I'm
it looks
guessing
like.
GitHub Actions integrates very well with the GitHub container registry thing.
Yes. Yes. That's not a problem. So it really isn't. Let's see. I want to look at all branches, the master branch. So let's see, what is the last one? This was the last build 2 days ago that went out. This is what the workflow looks like. We build the deps, we test, we compile the assets, and we publish. So this is much quicker, 5 minutes. Sometimes it can be slow. So you have like insights. You can see, roughly how long it takes and how many workflow runs you have, all branches. I think this is the interesting one. So you can see that the runs are getting, here they were a bit long, depending on queuing and whatnot, but it really doesn't matter. The point is, I suppose GitHub Actions, if you can, is all self-contained because you're already using GitHub.
Yeah.
If you're using GitLab, then use the GitLab CI, like whatever's easier.
I'm actually fighting GitLab CI on a client project. So is it just me being a bit of an idiot, or is just getting CI up and running in a satisfying way a really frustrating process, just because of pushing, watching it rerun, figuring out what this particular kind of CI likes, and
I think no, every CI has its quirks. Even GitHub Actions has its quirks. By the way, GitHub Actions, the infrastructure is Microsoft Azure. You get VMs. The VMs have certain limitations, the runners, and you can run into them. So things can be slower. Certain tests can start failing if they need lots of CPU or memory. And in that case, you would want to run your own workers, so like run it on your own infrastructure. Every single CI in my experience that I have used over the decades, it has its own little quirks, and I've used more than 10 by this point. Concourse was good. Concourse is a very interesting CI, but it has its own, little things. It's not a thing. Concourse CI, wherever this moved to. Org, that got rebranded. So this is a very interesting one. It has the concept of pipelines. This is a really good one. Very interesting CI. So this is what it looks like in terms of pipelines, but it has its own quirks. Circle CI, again, it's not perfect. I haven't used GitLab, so I don't know, but GitHub Actions to me sounds sufficient. And that's something that I would like us to move to. If you use Argo CD, can you do things in the Argo workflows? There's Tecton CD. There's so many CIs at this point.
So many options. Actually, we got a nice question here. Miniplace's great demo. Changelog has a fairly large dev team, right? What would you recommend for a smaller team? And
large team?
Large team. I can actually comment on that. So I've helped Changelog at times, and I believe the team at that point there's a designer somewhere. I didn't speak to him, but there's Jared, and then there was me, and then there's Gerhard on the controls back in the server closet. So that was the dev team. And then I got very busy, so I said, oh, Jared, if you still need some assistance, talk to Alex. I think there's been a lot of different people involved over the years, but I don't think there has ever been a large team behind the changelog.
So we have one developer, which is Jared, and he just wants to code and push.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we have, which is like literally code and push.
Also a busy man because he edits podcasts and if there's something more demanding time-wise than software development, it's probably editing anything.
Yeah. I like ops. I really like ops. Like ops has been my favorite forever. It's like something that I naturally gravitate towards. And this for me, it started as mostly a learning experience. Like how can I do things differently than I do in my day job?
Yeah, and
that's how, yeah.
that's a super important thing, I think, when doing hobby projects. Like, push yourself a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you really need to ship the thing and just get it out there, use something you know. But if what you're trying to do is learn and evolve, like actually do things you've never done before. A follow-up question then. Cool. So essentially 2 devs, but with dedicated ops. I think you're going to have to get into this more over time, Gerhard, because I think people get the impression that you work full time on the changelog, and I don't think that's the case.
No, it's not actually.
You have a day job, right?
It's mostly my spare time. Literally, this is how I learn. That's it. This is how I learn. I do things that I wouldn't do normally. I use Kubernetes in different ways. I get a different experience, and if I ship it, I mean, I have a podcast as well on changelog, so I just get to experiment things and also implement them. So I have a different perspective on things. Yeah. Right. So foundations of continuous delivery, for example, it's something that's really passionate. That's really I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I listened to that episode. I like that.
Yeah. Promex with Alex, we did like that integration.
Also a good episode.
yeah, that's a great one. So I'm literally I'm learning a lot, but it's not like I don't know what I'm doing and I'm learning. I'm experimenting, trying new things out, things that I wouldn't normally do. So I say, like, for example, like in the last 3 days, 4 days, in my free time, what would it look like to try Argo CD? How could I try it out? How can I learn? So literally, this is the first time I picked up Argo CD.
Yeah.
That's it. That's how it started. So ops is because I'm really interested in it. It's something, it's a topic that is interesting to me, and I try things out. And guess what? It works really well. I mean, changelog works really well. The setup works really well. It gets improved every year. And
no, Miniplays, those were not stupid questions. Those were good questions.
Those were great questions.
And that's actually an interesting thing. Like, people, it's easy to assume that any operation you look at that seems sort of professional or that you just know is well known, that they're large, huge, or whatever. I think a small org can do so very much, and for something like the changelog, producing the content is a lot more important than actually building the system. They just happen to do that and do it well and in an interesting fashion. Good folks. I've really enjoyed working with Gerhard and you on this stuff. We haven't really overlapped in the things we do while working on the changelog. So.
No, we didn't. You're right. I mean, you can see it here, right, from the contributions. You can see, I was just checking it out. You're a little bit here, literally like 5 commits here. That was it.
Yeah. It was a brief blip.
Yeah, it was just a brief blip. You can see, like, I started a little bit here. Now, by the way, we moved the repo. We had like an infrastructure one, so there was like more things happening here. And then everything moved into this repo. So it's a mono repo, including all the infrastructure stuff. And then this is what happened for 2021 for this year's setup. A little bit for 2020 there, but this is what it looks like. And you can see, like, there's long periods when nothing happens because it's a self-sustaining system. I think that's the important takeaway. Once you set it up, it just, it will sustain
itself until you decide to change it because you want to learn something new.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair.
Right. We have another good question.
Oh yeah. What I would be worried about is contingency for day 2 to 3 operations, upgrades, etc. How hard would it be for one of the devs to pick up the ops? And I think this is where I see a bit of a challenge with things like Kubernetes and stacking all of these almost magical bricks together. Because there's a lot you should probably know about where something like just a VPS where you put your code and then start it is sometimes stupidly simple. And you don't need to know the abstractions and the underlying thing. You just need to know the basic thing.
Yeah. So that is a very good one. And you have 2 options. First of all, as when you have like VPSs and bare metal servers, what typically happens is that you don't upgrade as often. So what typically happens, you set it up and it runs. And you run it for a few years and it's okay.
And no one wants to go in and run dist upgrade.
Exactly. No one wants to touch it. It's okay. Kubernetes, you can approach it like that from a certain perspective. So for example, when we run a Kubernetes version, we run it for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, right? Like for whatever the lifespan is, and then we upgrade to the next version. The components themselves, like for example, external DNS, again, we are a small team, and you have to think that, like, yes, it is a dynamic app, but everything is heavily cached. Everything is served from the CDN, except when Fastly has a bad day. That was an interesting experience for another time. The point being that once you get this stuff up and running, it's fairly stable and it doesn't change that often. When we have to change it like every year right now, spends a few days here and there and it's done. You've done the upgrade. You do blue-green one, you stand the new one up, you migrate everything across, and you take small steps in that right direction. I think Argo CD has the potential of changing that. Because if you declare everything needs manifest, you just bump some versions and you try it out. And then you always like try out maybe on the new cluster. So I don't exactly know how this would work in my head, but I do believe that we can have a system that is even self-updating.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And this is something which we talked about. I mean, we didn't have time for this year, but I think here I'm mentioning about like what comes next. We talked about the Kubernetes journey, what worked well, issues, what comes next. And I talk about, look, we are still playing the manual upgrade game. So I even mention it. Yeah. This was 2020.
Yeah.
Now that we are on LK, we want to automate Kubernetes upgrades. That is still a thing which is true. We still want to upgrade them. How? I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I think we actually have to wrap up. Thank you so much for the ride. This has been very, very enlightening. And I'm super curious to dig in and figure out at what level I want to put this. Because I have sort of conflicting ideas about how to do this kind of thing. And one part is someone's already built all this stuff, so I don't have to. Like if I want to do it my own way, that means I would have to build more stuff. And time is a tricky thing. I don't have infinite amounts of it.
I would really like to see how you run your setup. So just as I showed how I would run this app with k3s, starting from scratch, still single host, nothing complicated. We could go to like a managed Kubernetes with LKE. I don't think it would be that difficult, especially since we have these building blocks. And this setup can provision the LKE, which would be very interesting to see, and configure Argo and all the things. But I think it would also be interesting to see, how does the alternative look like? So the one that's like how you run your setup. That's what I would like to see. Just an idea. I'm not saying we have to do it.
It's almost embarrassingly simple. So it's a lot of SSHing into servers, pulling new stuff and rebuilding it there for my own things. And but for sort of production work that isn't on my dime, that will vary greatly depending on the client and the engagement. So
yeah, that makes sense.
We have to cut it here. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for watching. And this will be available on my website and the YouTube. Go to underjord.io if you want to keep track of this stuff, and check out Shipment on the changelog, because that's a sweet podcast, and Gerhard has high ambitions for it. So I hear.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.